Have you ever wondered where the problems in the world today would exist if we had deeper connection to ourselves, others, and the environment and acted from that place? Welcome to the Conscious Action Podcast with your host, Brian Berneman, who believes that connection is the key to taking conscious action as individuals and creating a better world. We are here to raise awareness and inspire meaningful action by sharing stories, knowledge, and conversations with thought leaders and change makers. From sustainability to well-being and everything related to conscious living, our mission is to empower you to be the change that you want to see in the world. Welcome, everyone, to a new episode of the Conscious Action Podcast. I am Brian Berneman, your host, and I have the pleasure to be joined all the way from just a little bit up north from where I am in Lee. Thank you so much, Olivia, for being here, for taking the time, and for this, which I know it's going to be a really beautiful conversation. For everyone that is watching and listening to us, what can you share about you and your journey so far in this life?
Yeah, hi, Brian. Thank you for having me here. It's an honor to join you. So I am a menstruality mentor, a cycle coach, and also birth doula. So I'm really passionate about bringing awareness and reverence to the womb space, specifically those keeping a womb having a direct relationship and trust in that space. So my journey started as a teenager through a series of events. I sort of landed at about 19 years old, feeling really disconnected from my body, really numb. My mental health was not in a good place. And I started looking for answers and trying to find a way out of that place. And that led me down quite a long road. So at first sort of going to mainstream medicine and not quite getting the answers that I needed, and surprisingly no one actually asking me about my cycle or my womb space or past trauma or my nervous system or anything like that. It was much more symptom-based and very physical. And now I view health as a much more holistic, complex symbiosis of a various assortment of things. So when I didn't really receive what I needed in that space, I went out on more of a seeking journey, and this led me down a path of yoga and different embodiment practices, and then also gathering in circles of women, sort of asking other sisters how they were feeling and what was unfolding in their body. And I found the more that I shared about my experience, the more collective it was actually shared. And I started to realize how systemic some of the things I was carrying were, and it inspired me to continue to deepen into this work and to understand kind of where the source of some of these issues were coming from. So continued with women's circles, exploring topics like sensuality, sexuality, self-advocation, self-trust, boundary setting, a whole arrangement of things. And focusing a lot on womb connection as well, and coming home to that space. And eventually was inspired to go down a birth doulaship training, which was beautiful. That was with Sophia Pascal here in Tauranga, Aotearoa. And then started working with pregnant mamas, which was a beautiful journey. But what I realized is that as I was supporting women to feel confident in their birth, to trust the unfolding of their bodies, I was coming up against the same themes that I had been working with in circle with maidens. So again, it made me realize that these systemic issues were affecting birth, and were going kind of further back through our lives, and that there was maybe an earlier point that we could start to address and alchemize some of those things. And so then I got inspired to dive more into the menstrual cycle, really seeing how that can be a pathway and initiation to bring us home to our bodies and to build a direct relationship and trust to the womb space. So now I really focus in that realm, doing various online courses and one-on-one coaching, and with this passion of bringing awareness for both those holding a womb and also for those who aren't holding a womb, to hold reverence for that space. I really love here in Aotearoa, in Te Reo Māori, the Indigenous language here, the name for the womb space is Te Whare Tangata, the house of the people. And that to me is just so profound in the sense that it takes it from just a woman's problem or a woman's thing to work with and heal, but it actually affects all of us. And if we can all bring reverence and honor and create safety for Te Whare Tangata, I can see the world having quite profound change unfold.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Thank you for sharing all of that. I think that a lot of times our own journey and how we get into different learnings, or we have certain curiosity, is so beautiful how that unfolds. I know in my own journey as a teenager that I remember going to different classes and suddenly starting to feel reconnected or connected for the first time with my body and with feelings and with energy. And that kind of like led me on the path that I've been now for the last 20 plus years of, trying to understand more and more about my experience, about, the shared experience that we have. And one of the things that through the years, I've been coming across a lot, because I work with a lot of women through the years, has been the cycles and how disconnected we are, not only from cycles just in general, because we live in spaces and environments with cycles as well. We have our own cycles, and for women, it's quite a different thing than for men. So I would love if you can share a little bit about women's cycle to start with, so that then we can expand there, because I know for, unfortunately, majority of people, both women and men, so those, as you're saying, carrying a womb or not, we don't know much about this. And I've been, through the years exploring to try to understand the woman that I'm supporting as well as the woman in my life. But there's a lot of ignorance really on how we function. So yeah, I would love it if you can share a little bit from that space, and then we'll continue.
So I'll start off by sharing the kind of deeper training I went into around menstruality was with the Red School and with Alexandra Pope and her inner seasons maps. So she works with the menstrual cycle and compares it to the seasons of Mother Earth. And that's such a beautiful metaphor, I find, for all of us to relate to. And with that, and with all this work, I think the most important thing is our own experience. So the mind and the body work in harmony. And I think the mind helps keep the body in center, and the body helps keep the mind in center. And what can be tempting as we start to lean into this work, especially if we've been raised in kind of that Western paradigm that's very mental focused, we can almost get stuck there and get too locked in on what's the right way, how am I supposed to feel here, how do I learn about cycles outside of myself. And what's so magic in this work, like you were sharing before, as you started your journey of coming home to yourself, it sounds like you were having direct experiences within your own body, and that was really giving you this aha and kind of guiding you to the next part. And it's the same with understanding our cycles. It's less about learning from the external, though it can be helpful to get guidance and different ideas to orientate ourselves of how we feel within that. But the main thing is actually, in my opinion, unlearning quite a lot and letting go of what's actually keeping us from our nature that's already innately there within us. So it's not something we have to learn or grasp. It's very much a coming home. So how, in my experience, how I've found that path home is a lot of listening. So yeah, like the world outside of us, it's sort of a remembrance of our nature. So I like this seasons metaphor because you can see nature outside of ourselves. The flowers bloom, they come up, and they die and fall away again. And there's these life cycles that ebb and flow, whether it's the tides or the waxing and waning of the moon. There's this inhale and exhale that we as human beings also carry. It's quite a modern phenomena to like nature or spend time in nature. And we need to actually remember that we too are an expression of nature. And it's about coming back to this ebb and flow within us. And that can actually be felt when you start tuning in and listening and giving yourself permission, cycle by cycle, whether that's your menstrual cycle or a moon cycle, to start to come home and find what's there. So to answer your question, with the menstrual cycle and the way the inner seasons are reflected in that, it's the idea that our cycle is made up of 4 phases. So you have the menstruation phase, and that's reflective of our inner winter. So this time of sort of landing and rest, and there's a death and a rebirth there coming through the base of the cycle. And then you start to rise up on the inhale, up through the follicular phase, up through your inner spring as energy starts to rise and return to the body. There's that rise of estrogen up towards ovulation. And then the ovulatory phase is like our inner summer. So this expansive, fertile, abundant, more high energy time could be likened to the full bloom of a flower or fruiting or full moon. And then we start to exhale and descend back down the other side through our luteal phase, which is where progesterone starts to increase, and we're preparing either for a baby or a bleed, and we start to land back down. So the sort of 9 to 5 construct is more based off a male hormone system, where testosterone peaks around the middle of the day, falls away again, and is more consistent day to day, compared to the female hormonal cycle is consistent but from month to month, and that wave is much more elongated. And so to expect ourselves to show up the same every single day through the month and function the same, for our needs to be the same, for our sexual desires to be the same, for almost our personality to be the same, is quite a big ask. And it can, putting that pressure, I know from my own experience, putting that pressure on myself caused a lot of disconnect and a lot of, just self-judgment and feeling really lost in myself. It was one of those main experiences when I was about 19 was going to the medical system and having this complaint of feeling low for a few weeks and then really low for another few weeks, and wondering why I couldn't just stay consistent in the same. And it wasn't met in the best way, but if I had at that time someone just validating that I had a cycle and I wasn't the same every day, I think that would have brought me so much permission and such an exhale to land more fully into that.
Yes, and I think that with that, I love the fact that you were saying, the unlearning and the actual experience, because as you're saying, there is a lot of benefit on having this information. Even just what you were saying, there's these 4 different main aspects of the cycle, and there is I love this, the exhale and the inhale, or the different experiences that we might have, and the fact that we have been as a society mostly on a patriarchal, male-dominated model that has been taking us away from the power of those cycles, has made, as you're saying, for you and for many women, that there's no validation on your actual experience. Therefore, there's this potential thought that there's something wrong with me. And I see this a lot of times with a lot of my clients. It's like there's something wrong. I'm not, being able to be creative all of the time and not able to perform all of the time at work or, in whatever medium or space or environment they're in. And a lot of times the fact that we have been losing that knowledge and now it's starting to rise again. I think that it's so important to be able to both educate ourselves and, importantly, as you were saying, having a first-hand experience of how that actually shows up for each of us, because again, as well, we're all different. And the more that we know and the more that we explore, the more of that coming back home, as you were saying, that we have. And then we can interact both with ourselves and with others in such a different way than perhaps what we are doing when we are not honoring our own experience and our own needs. So, yeah, I'd love if you can share as well some of the different types of experiences that perhaps, those in the different moments of the cycle, what can be, the actual experience in terms of how do you know when you're in those parts of the cycles for those that haven't been paying attention, or just looking at the different types of experiences that can give you a glimpse of like, okay, now I'm craving all of this food. So, there's potential that I'm in this part of my cycle, or I feel really creative and I want to do all of these things. So would you be able to share a little bit more around what are some of the potential common types of experiences that can be experienced?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I'd love to. Um, So there are kind of archetypal and common occurrences that do happen, like often around ovulation, because there's the eggs there's fertility, so libido can increase around that time. As we're slowing down and progesterone's increasing in the second half of the cycle through the luteal phase or the inner autumn, we are it's pro-gestation, so there's more sort of calm and landing, and it can be common that there's more sensitivity there as we're sort of looking around if it's safe to surrender and bleed and go down into ourselves. So I find in that time there can be like a stronger intuition or a need for more time alone. At menstruation, there's the biomarker of bleeding and maybe feeling much more sensitive and open to the world. And I say all this, these are things that can occur and often do occur. But what's interesting of where we're at in this time and place is the relationship we all have with the different seasons. So depending on your relationship to a certain part of that growth cycle, a different experience can come up for each of us. So it's hard. I feel reluctant to get too specific on how it all unfolds because, like I was saying earlier, it takes it out of the mind and away from the felt experience. But essentially, there's this rise up into this sort of external abundance and then landing back down into ourselves. For me, I experience sort of a rising up into more of a mind space and creativity and external interaction, and then landing back inwards and looking more internally. So as we're working with our cycle, what I often say, it's both the mirror and the medicine. So to kind of go back to what we were saying before about these sort of patriarchal woundings that go back through time that are affecting how we can relate to some of these cycles, whether it's, so the current mainstream culture always wants you to be on that rise, on that creation out into the world and just being sort of socially available, fertile, and quite peppy. For men as well, the sort of constant productivity, and we don't really value as much that rest and surrender and pause. And so with some of these different beliefs that are wound into us, whether through our family or society at large, whether they're conscious beliefs or subconscious beliefs, can show up as quite a strong mirror. And so to say that during your inner summer, you will feel social or turned on or all these different things. But if you as an individual have trauma around sexuality, if you feel afraid to take up space, if you put a lot of pressure on yourself to be perfect, coming up to that rise, there can actually be a sense of collapse or numbness. And so then people, again, can feel like there's something wrong with them because they're like, oh, I'm supposed to be in my inner summer. I'm about halfway through my cycle. Something's wrong with me. And it's not that something's wrong with them, but rather there's this beautiful mirror being presented. And then we can work with that, work with the medicine of that season through other practices, even whether it's journaling or therapy or different meditation guidance to rewire subconscious beliefs, or perhaps it's just the awareness of it that helps it move through. So to give a more personal example, I had this idea that inner summer was supposed to be this social fertile time, and I had this almost Barbie archetype in my head of someone who was just so glowy and shiny, and I kept falling short of that level of perfection, and it was so subconscious I didn't really clock it. But as I came into more acceptance of myself, and once I realized I had that unattainable standard, I kind of realized what my inner summer felt and looked like, and it was a much more grounded sense. It was still solid, and compared to my inner winter, it feels much more like I'm taking up more space. I feel more bold and more like this full moon mirror sort of shining out in the world. But my inner summer will feel different to somebody else's inner summer. And I feel really comfortable in the descent. I find diving into my inner world and looking at my subconscious really fascinating. So I really love that second half of the cycle, coming back down into myself, where a common thing that can come up in the inner autumn is that reflective sense of the cycle, just reflection on ourselves as well. So that's where a lot of more negative symptoms of PMS can be there if we're not holding ourselves in love and grace. So I really love that descent, and I feel like I hold myself quite well there. But if someone is resistant to slow down or resistant to kind of really sit with themselves, if there's emotions or truths that they're avoiding, then that luteal phase can show up really crunchy and challenging. So again, I could say, if I was to project an experience onto the cycle, I could say, in your late luteal, you'll feel really cranky and low energy and all these different things, which is a common symptom that shows up because of how we relate to the cycle in quite a common way. There's this resistance to slow down, this resistance to exhale, but I wouldn't say that that is how our inner autumn is supposed to be. And one thing I can, or I'm willing to share, is again just that mirror of nature, and then we can use the mirror to orientate ourselves with that. So one metaphor I really love to use is inner winter, so menstruation being like the seed and the soil, landing into that depth and rooting down into the sort of darkness of ourselves, not darkness necessarily being a bad thing, but that sort of unseen subconscious underworld. And then we come up through spring, we have the blossoming and the sprout. So there's this tenderness there and a love that I think is needed to cherish ourselves and nurture that growth up so that it can feel safe and bloom in an authentic way. So in a spring can be a lot about how we parent ourselves and hold ourselves through new beginnings. So we rise that energy up, and then summer being like the full bloom, that flower, that blossom. Every flower is going to be different. Every flower is going to express differently. That peak and holding of the top of the inhale, And then through the autumn, we have that descent, the waning moon, and more of a harvest and compost. So things are falling away that no longer serve us. We can harvest and take on what does serve us, looking at what we've gained through that cycle or these last few cycles. So there's a harvesting energy there, a reflective time as we land back in. And what I love about, even if we've felt disconnected from our cycles, in general, we're still by default connected to external cycles. Mm. So most of us will probably have a sense of how we feel in summer and how life's just a little bit different once you tip through autumn equinox this time of year and things start to slow down. You start to kind of reflect and work out what you want to do with this next year. Mm-hmm. And we land down into winter. There's that. It could be a challenging time for some people in the depth and darkness of winter. And then there's that feeling when spring returns and the energy starts to rise back up. So those are some examples of how the cycle can move through without getting too specific and locking things in. Because I feel so passionate to not turn this work into a new standard for women or a new box that we have to achieve or fit ourselves into to be enough. It's very much just a compass to guide us home. As opposed to something we have to achieve or perfect.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And I think it's really important, as you keep on saying, the honoring of our individual experience. And, I work a lot with trauma and with conditioning and ancestral trauma. And I can definitely see, as you're sharing, that with depending on our own experience of all of that, how our relationship can be in those different stages or those different moments of the cycle. And, I was talking with one of my clients once, and for her, as an example, the cramping and a lot of pain, she thought that was, this is how it is, and this is how it's going to be my entire life, because this is what she learned. And working with her in some different ways, we discovered one that in her family and her childhood, when she bled for the first time, that was a shameful thing, and how as well there was a lot of secrecy in a sense. No one talked about it. It was such a different thing. And as well, we ended up working in some ancestral trauma, and little by little, her relationship with that started to change. And I think that this is really important to be able to understand how at the different stages for all of us, there might be some commonalities, as you're saying, without having to say, oh, this is how each stage is going to be, because it might be slightly different or quite different for a lot of us. And at the same time, I feel that being able to have a slight understanding, as you are sharing with us some of these different spaces or parts of the cycle, or some experiences that might be there, when we start to reconnect with that and we're able to honor where we are, then it can be a beautiful thing. Because as well, and I know this being a male, I come from a mother like everyone else. There's women in my life, my sister, my ex-partners, everyone that has been a part of my life, my friends. And the more that I am able to understand and honor the needs that they have at each part of their days or weeks, I can show up so much more differently, just as they can show up differently for them, if there's a more honoring of where they are and their felt experience. And I think that the fact that there has been so much disconnection with this is an opportunity for curiosity and for learning. I love that you were sharing. I went to your workshop at Earthbeat Festival, that you were sharing about the cards to start to see where you are in your cycle. And I think that as a male, if I know that, and it's kind of like someone is holding their card in a sense, and it's like, oh, this is where I am in my cycle. And especially for intimate relationships, if you start to understand more their tendencies, their needs, their feelings, you can show up much better to support that. So yeah, I don't know if there's something from what I just shared that you'd like to add on to, or to share your perspective.
Mm-hmm. I'd first like to just acknowledge you and really honor that reverence you have for the woman in your life and that curiosity to learn. It's just the most important place to start. Yeah, realizing, like you said, we all come from the womb space. We're all babies of Te Whare Tangata. And we can all learn to hold more reverence and be curious how that flows with the woman in our life and how their needs shift throughout the cycle. So something that was coming up that I wanted to mention with your client with the cramping and that experience in the luteal phase, in the same way that if you wake up at 3 a.m. and you have 3 coffees, then you scroll on your phone and then kind of go back to sleep, wake back up, maybe eat some junk food, you're going to notice that in your afternoon. Like what you do in your morning affects you later in your day. We all kind of have an intuitive sense of that. It's the same as a cycle, which can be a little bit trickier to catch because it's over a longer period of time. So bringing awareness to all phases of the cycle, it's not just menstruation, it's not just about the bleeding. There's a wave or a river that's flowing that if something's happening upstream, if there's a sense of unsafety or a contraction or a way that we're treating ourselves or being treated, that can affect how something shows up downstream. And often with that harvest compost energy of inner autumn, that's kind of where the truth can bubble up to the surface, whether it's something we haven't been expressing, a truth we've been keeping, or a negative thought that we've been kind of crushing ourselves down with. When we get to that harvest point, it becomes really clear. So yeah, there's a beauty with being curious about the whole cycle rather than just where something's coming up. It's a whole journey and it's all interconnected. So I was going to say. Yeah, so with the cards that I've created, or any resource, the main resource I would share would be tracking your cycle each day with a written tracker. So this just gives you a sense of your cycle length and starts to give you a felt sense of where you're peaking, perhaps where your ovulation lies, which is often about mid-cycle, but it can vary and shift depending on the circumstances of that cycle as well as cycle length. So a lot of apps base your cycle off a 28-day cycle and kind of lock you into ovulating halfway through and don't take in other variables into account. So by coming into a written tracker, you're forming that direct relationship with your cycle and getting curious of how that river is flowing and expressing for you. So something that came, and then you can use like the cards or other rituals to anchor and symbolize to yourself when that season has changed, just to notice what's changing in you and keep that thread of awareness through that moving river. And these rituals can be a personal thing. It can also include a partner or something in a shared space. So having something physical that shifts in your communal space so everyone kind of knows what's changing and where you're at can be a really beautiful thing. But first and foremost, we need to come home and ride that wave ourselves. So a couple of interesting things that showed up for me once I started looking at my cycle as a whole and actually tracking that longer flow was I thought that I occasionally experienced anxiety or depression or kind of had these challenging days that were random. But once I started cycle tracking with a written tracker, I realized quite a few things were very cyclical, almost to the day. So I noticed, like I was speaking to earlier, about that relationship I had with my inner summer for 3 months in a row around day 11, 12, just before my ovulation, just before that peak of energy, I experienced this collapse and this anxiety and pressure on myself and kind of dip in my mental health. Same day, 3 months in a row. So that was just such amazing information and a strong mirror to like, okay, how can I maybe back it up a bit to really rest and connect with myself in my inner autumn, work with that seed and soil, really nourish and nurture myself with kindness as I rise up through my spring to step into the fullness of my summer with grace and authenticity. Another thing that I noticed was around day 20, 21 for 3 months in a row. Again, I had this day where I just kind of overate on snacks that weren't so good for me and kind of had this spiral around, sort of being like, oh, I shouldn't eat that, and this really self-judgment, self-critical, self-sabotaging spiral that I thought happened randomly, but I realized it was the same time every month. And so knowing as we come into inner autumn, we actually start to burn about 300 to 400 more calories a day. And so as I come out of ovulation, I start to eat more kumara, more sweet potato, more complex carbohydrates, and really nourish myself so I can carry myself through what was before a little blip. And now it kind of has smoothed out with a bit more, love and grace. So as I've come in to get to know myself and ride that thread and know what my gifts are throughout my cycle, I love comparing it to a compass or even our own personal medicine wheel, where my gifts lie, where my challenges come up if I haven't been so in alignment with myself. And now that I have a more intimate connection with that, I know what my needs are, and then I can actually ask that of a partner or of a friend and be a bit more vulnerable in how I'm unfolding in the world. So it's very much we've got to come home to ourselves to be able to invite someone into that home.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Thank you for sharing all of that, as well as your own experience, because I think that a lot of times that is what gives others permission as well. And you're saying that honoring is so important, because when we start to reconnect with ourselves, and when we start to actually start to honor our needs, it is easier. Perhaps, of course, there might be some traumas or things, but it is easier to then communicate and to share and to be able to have those around us understand, where we are, what we need. This, again, for males as well, like our needs, and to be able to share them with others, because we're usually in relationship, whether that's, a partner, family, work, mates, we're in relationship to others that, if we don't know where we are, how can we communicate and share with others what's going on, so that then they can show up in the best way possible as they can, or their own capacity to show up for our needs. And I think that this, as you're saying, for anyone that is in a relationship, if the woman starts to reconnect more, if they haven't yet, to their own cycle, to be able to share with their partners, so that then they can show up more, to give support. And I think that that's so important. And at the same time, and this is of course something challenge, but something that I have worked with a few clients of mine, is at work to, of course, be open and vulnerable, and to ask their manager or their boss if there is a way that they can adapt their work weeks or their work day to support their own needs of where they are in the cycle. And, one of my clients, actually, their boss told them, yes, like, just do what's right for you, as long as, by the end of the month or by the end of whatever project, everything gets done. It's like, some days, if you need more time, or if some days you're really creative, let's just work on this. Whereas other bosses of my clients weren't as receptive and allowing. And then, it's up to them to take care of themselves as best as possible within the circumstances of what's going on in their work life. But I think that it's so important to be able to, when we know something, to be open and understand, the more that I share, the better others can show up for me. And as you were saying, that can be challenging, expressing things that then perhaps you can see, as you were saying, in symptoms in other parts of your cycle, how this requires a holistic approach, because as well as our own honoring, we need others to be there for us and to support us. And the more that we're able to have this information as well as the experience for each of us, as you were saying, that coming home, then it is easier to then start to create a more conducive environment for us to thrive into, and to then allow our fullness of experience to work with the things that show up that we need to work with, and to allow and to be more receptive, and to explore this beautiful life that sometimes doesn't seem as beautiful based on a lot of our experiences. I think that the more that we're able to explore ourselves, the more that we're able to be in our bodies, to embody whatever it is that is alive now for us, then we also start to show others and to give others permission and to model, what it's like to be perhaps more connected, more attuned to cycles, more attuned to, as you're saying, we are nature, to nature and to the different cycles, not only our internal cycle, but the external cycles, and how all of that can come together to create changes in our own communities, in our own families, and in the bigger picture of society.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very much the front lines in my mind of this revolution and anchoring this culture into the world a little bit more. And I really hear what you're saying about the more we can just be vulnerable and share how much we can co-create that culture, and that change kind of starts with us. And I will also say, just with all of us, safety is so important. And also the female hormone system is so stress sensitive and responds to our sense of safety. So for example, if we're feeling unsafe, ovulation might be delayed. And this could be that we're actually physically unsafe, or there's movement happening, say we're moving house or something like that, or maybe it's a perceived unsafety from a story that we're telling ourselves, or whatever it might be. So holding ourselves, I think there's always beauty and vulnerability, and there's an importance of safety. So if you're kind of new to claiming this work, if it feels quite edgy for you to speak to, I would encourage you to speak to people that you trust as you start to find your voice. If you find that you share it with someone, and if they're like, oh, that's stupid, we don't talk about that, and that really knocks your confidence and your sense of safety, then maybe there's a more gentler approach that you can take with yourself. We don't have to just put our heart out on our sleeves to anyone who's there to see it, because it doesn't always create safety. So same as within the workspace, if someone's less receptive, it's not necessarily our job to convince them. But something I really love is the 1% rule. So this is again from the Red School, but this idea that whatever we're trying to hold for ourselves, we can do by at least 1%. So say you're not allowed to take the rest that you want during your bleed at work, but by implementing the 1% rule, perhaps that shows up as coming to work, giving yourself more time in the morning to not create stress. Maybe it's moving a little bit slower as you walk from your desk to the bathroom, holding softness through your body, and maybe going and sitting by yourself at lunch as opposed to forcing yourself to show up all peppy if you're not feeling that way. So yeah, there's a nuance there, and just really holding ourselves and working out what we feel safe to share and where we are actually at in our journey. And also, there is so much power, and even if something isn't well received the first time, maybe you share something with your boss and they're just like, I can't believe you're talking to me about your menstrual cycle. This is so inappropriate. They get really triggered, whatever that is. We can love ourselves through that. But then perhaps the next time an employee comes and they're like, hey, ask the same question, that boss has now been exposed a little bit and is like, oh, okay, we're talking about this now. That's interesting. And maybe it's the third time that they start to soften. But when we are with anything, if we're trying to push up against someone or get them to change their ways, it often isn't received as well compared to if we're just claiming this within our own body, within our own grace and confidence. Something radiates out of us, and then people get curious and kind of come in towards us to find out more. And so I think as well with men who really want to show up in support of this work, there's such a beautiful invitation to lean into your own cyclical nature and your own relationship to the seasons, or that inhale and exhale, even the seasons of life. So the inhale of a new relationship, that excitement and building, and then perhaps there's an exhale and a letting go, and it's time for that relationship to fall away and close. And how we hold ourselves through these cycles can be a really strong mirror. How we hold ourselves through the greater seasons can be a really strong mirror. So if as a man you have a lot of resistance to descending down into winter, like if you're at this time of year and you're just like, oh, tense in your body and not wanting to slow down and stop, it can be hard to authentically show up as a safe space for a woman if they're kind of wanting to descend and go down. But if you, within your own body, hold resistance or judgment towards not being productive all the time, or that can be subtly projected out. So all of us coming home to our own relationship to this harmony within of both, I say masculine and feminine, not on genders, but masculine in terms of that action and expression out into the world, this more, this inhale, and then the feminine, the receptivity, landing back down, and how both are integrated into our own beings helps us really show up in safety in that collective culture as well.
Yes, and I think that, a reminder for me all of the time, for anyone listening or watching us, is that honoring that you're individual and understanding your own processes, your own timings, your own experience, as you're saying, that not need for safety and for just reconnecting and allowing, and then, as well, expressing that for someone can be done, fairly fast, perhaps in a month or 2 or 3, as they start to potentially reconnect if they haven't yet to their own cycle. And for others, perhaps it takes them years to, unpack and unlearn a lot of things, and to work with trauma and work with that sense of safety. And I think that honoring is really important. And this is why I all of the time, encourage all of us to both learn and to be parts of groups, and at the same time work individually, because sometimes in group things or in information, as you're saying, it might not be exactly my experience. So, the more that we're able to honor that, yes, there's a lot of commonalities, and as well, I'm an individual, I'm unique, and no one is me. So just honoring of that, I think it's really, really important. And Olivia, I would love to ask you something. I know that we're getting a little bit closer towards the end of our conversation, but I would love to ask you, in terms of your work as a doula, as a birth doula, what can you share about, the importance for that opening or portal or moment of birth for an understanding of the cycle before and having that relationship? Have you noticed any differences with women that perhaps were more connected and more attuned to their bodies and to their cycle than women that perhaps haven't when they are in the process of birthing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great question. I can't believe that an hour's flown by. Yes, so the beautiful thing about working with cycle, it's from my experience and a lot of what my clients experience, it's not just us interacting with our cycle is also interacting with us. So, like I was saying at the beginning, we're very much part of nature and this force that is changing the external seasons, blooming the flowers is also moving through our body. So there's an intelligence there that's sort of bigger than ourselves. And through conscious menstruation, which is sort of the terminology I use for this kind of work of being aware of our cycles, working with our cycle as an evolutionary path, helps us create a relationship with this force and a trust in this force, that it has our best interest at mind, that it is innately intelligent, and that if we can soften and surrender to it, that it moves really healthily most of the time. If we can create that safety and that sense of belonging in our cycle, things start to smooth out and flow. And same as with birth, though there's different variables that it can occur. I really hold the view that we don't birth, like birth happens to us, birth happens through us. And if we can soften and trust and allow that process to occur, then there's a much more ease through that process. And so in this way, working with our cycle, we can start to alchemize and work with these mirrors that might come up, whether it's around fertility, if there's a collapse around ovulation or a sense of unsafety about holding creativity, it can be harder to conceive. And same as we're descending down into menstruation, if we don't trust in death and rebirth, if we don't trust that it's a cycle and not this linear line, that we're not just going to go and then disappear, that we die when we bleed, there's this crossover point that can be quite profound for a lot of people, where we die and we're reborn out the other side and something occurs. So that relationship to that transition, that comfort there and that ease there can then be applied to birth. Birth is always going to be an initiation if you're moving from maiden to mother, if it's your first child. That's just a new level up. And menstruation, building that relationship to that force flowing through our womb, helps us step into that birth journey with more trust and more ease.
Beautiful. I know there's plenty more questions that I'd love to ask you, but just to honor your time as well. Is there something that perhaps you'd like to share with everyone that is watching and listening to us, perhaps to reiterate something that you already shared or something that you haven't yet shared with us about this space and how it can be supportive? So some perhaps golden nugget or something that you feel that is alive at this moment that you'd like to share.
Oh, so many golden nuggets. But yeah, I think a really strong thread of why I do this work is because I really see the birth journey as an initiation of both how we step into motherhood and also an initiation for the baby coming earthside. So it's our first experience of the world. It's our first sort of imprint on our nervous system. And if that experience feels like you're not being trusted, if your mother's not being trusted, there's this disconnect and all this kind of foreign lighting and confusion, that sense of separation from the natural world can kind of be impacted from that early age. And so by coming back to the womb space, all of us holding safety and creating presence for that space will bring more reverence and trust for that birth journey and allow our first experience as babies to be a bit more trusted and held as sacred, as opposed to something that can't be trusted or needs to be intervened. So sometimes interventions are needed. I'm not saying that that's absolutely out of the picture, but yeah, to be starting from a place where the womb space is trusted, the forces moving through this space is trusted, and that we can trust the innate intelligence of nature moving through. Like coming home to the womb space for the next generations and how they interact with the world.
Love that. Love that. Olivia, for anyone that is listening to us, if they are interested in exploring more of this, where can they find you? How can they work with you if they are resonating with you and what you're sharing?
So I am Rose from Root on Instagram. I post quite regularly there with different experiences and inspirations and reminders. I also share on there where different offerings are coming up, whether those are in-person ceremonies or online courses. So I have an online course coming up starting on the 13th of May. So this is an embodied journey through the inner seasons of the menstrual cycle to start to really come home to this thread within you. That's a online container with a group of women. So you can find out about that through my Instagram. I also am rosefromroot.com. If you're not on social media, you can contact me there. You can join my mailing list, check out some of the courses and offerings I have there. I have a few free resources on my website that you can also access through my Instagram. So one of those being a free cycle tracking chart. And I really love how this is laid out because it gives you really clear information over 3 months to start to understand some of the mirrors and medicine that's coming through your cycle. So yeah, I'd really recommend if you're curious about this work to start with that kind of practice. There's more information within the resource about specifics. I also have some pre-recorded guided meditations through my site as well. And then do one-on-one mentoring too, there's more information online as well. So yeah, Rose from Root on Instagram and rosefromroot.com.
Beautiful. And I'll have those links on the show notes so that if you're interested in exploring, it's easy access there. I know, Olivia, that as I said, I have many more things that I would love to explore, but I want to honor our time. So perhaps I'll need to have you another time for another conversation. But for now, it's just my gratitude for being here, for sharing, for the work that you're doing. As you're saying, like this is really important to be able to create some changes, especially for the future, but as well for now and for healing the past. I believe that as we do things differently, as we honor ourselves, as we heal our current experience, we also heal the past. So thank you for being here and for taking the time to share.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. Thank you for your beautiful questions and sharing your experience as well. And yeah, for holding this beautiful podcast and having these wonderful conversations. It's special to be involved. And yeah, I think we could do another 2-3 episodes. So much to dive into. But yeah, I've loved my time here. So thank you.
Thank you. And for everyone watching and listening to us, what did you hear? What did you learn? Was there something new, different? How has been your own relationship with your cycles? I'd love to know. So anywhere that you are seeing this, send a comment there, share with us your experience, send your questions. Again, if you are interested in working with this, go and check out Olivia's work and hopefully, keep on doing your own thing and honoring your own needs. But thank you. Thank you once more, Olivia. Thank you, everyone, for being here. And until next time, bye.
What did you like the most about this episode? Take a moment to think about what change you can make in your life today.
Share your conscious action on social media using #ConsciousAction and tagging @ConsciousActionNZ so we can celebrate your impact on the world and create a ripple effect.
One easy action we would love for you to take right now is to share, like, and subscribe to this podcast. This will help us get these messages out into the world and inspire more people to take conscious action in their own lives, contributing to the better world we hope for.